for a large number of reports that have to be done. So the report that was done this past week was in terms of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. We will be doing more later. For example, the country report to the African Union Human Rights Committee Council is next month in Banjul, the Gambia. We've then got a further report to Geneva, and there's many more coming as well. So it's not a once-off process. It's in terms of whatever the relevant treaty is that we're reporting to.
Apparently this report was supposed to have been submitted in the year 2000 and only submitted 14 years later. Why?
Yes, I mean it was very overdue. Basically, before democracy, South Africa wasn't a signatory to any of these treaties, so that was something new that arrived with democracy. There were then a number of treaties that we've acceded to as South Africa, and a number of reports that have to be written. And there were some problems in the beginning in terms of developing the capacity to draft those reports. So I think we've overcome that. This one was late. It's something we've admitted to, but I think we are overcoming that, and we will be able to keep time in future. As I said, there are a number of international treaties that we are having to do reports to. There's a further 3 that Justice is involved in for the rest of this year, and a few other government departments also involved in other reports this year as well.
I hope you'll keep us up to date with those reports so that we can make a follow-up as to whether we are on course with our human rights record and all the treaties that we have to fall into.
Sure.
Both of you can probably respond to this, Dr. Titus and the Deputy Minister. One would have expected that the Human Rights Commission, as a human rights watchdog, would prepare a report of this nature and submit it on behalf of government. Why did government do their own report and the Human Rights Commission their own report?
No, it doesn't work like that, Mr. Muteza. South Africa, as a state party to the covenant, decide along with other countries to accede to this covenant, meaning it says to the world, we abide by the contents of this covenant and we undertake to implement quite effectively within our national system all the rights and obligations in this covenant. So it is first and foremost a state party obligation. So the state reports, and then the UN committee asks of the Human Rights Commission and other NGOs like the Resources Center and others that were in Geneva to comment on that. We comment on that with our reports, and then they come back and they say, but we have a list of issues that we want you to attend to. Then we respond to that list of issues, and then everybody goes to Geneva, and then we present our side in terms of they call it a constructive dialogue with the South African State Party, and the Minister was there with quite a large delegation of government officials, one Minister and another Deputy Minister, which is quite positive in my view that we have such a strong commitment to this. So that is the broad process, but in principle it means that South Africans shouldn't see this as something separate. It doesn't belong in Geneva. It is part of us being connected with the world. Our national human rights systems are now given extra strength by aligning with an international movement. What happens now is that the committee, after its engagement, after its perusal of the report, will come back with recommendations and with a communication. And this is now the area we must watch for. What are they going to tell the Minister in particular? What are they going to tell the South African State Party to do or not to do? We were there in 2006 with a Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. They've given us a range of recommendations which I do not think we have given much attention to yet. But with this new approach by the Ministry of Justice, I really think we can look forward to this kind of communication, which is not really practiced in South Africa, very well established. We would like to see that advocates put this report in their arguments when they go to court, the litigation, that judges will make more use of these reports, and that South Africans in general should really see the value of what is being said in their name abroad and how it is implemented back.
Deputy Minister, I would like to come in there because I have a question to both of you.
Look, I think Dr. Titus has covered it. It is South Africa as the state that has acceded to the covenant, and it's South Africa that has to report. Part of the reporting process is to hear from the National Human Rights Institution, so in our case it's the South African Human Rights Commission, and from civil society. The civil society presentations were made on Monday morning. We were not allowed to, as the state, as the government, we weren't allowed to be there to listen to those. That is the convention that the United Nations Committee follows, so we didn't get to hear what they had to say about us. I do think, and I would agree with Dr. Titus, that we do need to look at improving the dialogue between government and civil society, particularly back home on the issues. But the process is important for countries to be held accountable for their human rights records.
Let me come back to Avani, the issue I wanted to ask you, which I wanted to comment on. I was sitting the whole weekend with this idea in my mind. Before we make a presentation to the UN Human Rights Committee, probably we should meet as civil society and the Human Rights Commission and government and look at these reports together before we go to the UN Human Rights Commission, because I noticed the reports are quite different and they are not talking to each other.
So I think going forward there will be better engagement with this. The Deputy Minister mentioned in Geneva, and again now, and we welcome that better coordination with the national human rights institutions, with civil society amongst ourselves, as well as with the other entities, will be very useful. This doesn't mean that civil society loses its right to present a separate report, which I think in itself has tremendous value. But if we can strengthen the effectiveness of the state reporting, I think that in itself is incredibly valuable.
Deputy Minister?
Yep.
Yes, I just wanted to know, would it not be a good idea if the Department of Justice and the Human Rights Commission and the civil society groups get together before we go to the UN Human Rights Committee?
No, there would be, and I would accept that there wasn't enough public involvement in the drafting process of the report. We do meet government, or particularly my department and the Human Rights Commission quarterly, so I don't think there's too many problems of communications with the Human Rights Commission. Obviously one needs to look at improving consultation with civil society. Obviously there will always be differences because all human rights have to be balanced against other human rights. But yes, we could, I'm sure, make a lot of progress by improving our dialogue back home.
Thank you very much. I just want to say there's something I wanted to ask around these issues, but unfortunately I just want to say to the viewers that we are not going to cover everything that was reported to the UN Human Rights Committee because of time, but we have selected a few topics which we are going to discuss that are rather very important. If you'd like to join us on today's discussion, please call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights and Recourse, or email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. Stay with us.
Whether you're an investment banker, an inspiring photographer, a loving parent, a taxi driver delivering precious cargo, a teacher, or an architect, we all need to plan for our future with safe, secure investments that bring financial freedom and peace of mind. Visit rsaretailbonds.gov.za. No fees and no commissions. RSA Retail Savings Bonds, the smart way to save.
This color is part of who we are. It's a gift. It's striking, remarkable, powerful, and it should never, ever divide us. Take on racism and unite South Africa. Find out what you can do during Anti-Racism Week from 14 to 21 March at ansa.org.za. ANSA is an alliance of organizations supported by the Nelson Mandela and Ahmed Kathrada Foundations.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse as we discuss the presentations made by the South African government and NGOs and the South African Human Rights Commission to the UN Human Rights Committee. But before we go to our first topic, I just want to get this over with, Dr. Titus. There is a view that the South African Human Rights Commission has been lax in meeting its mandate, especially with regard to Section 13.1b and subsection 6, that says the South African Human Rights Commission must monitor the implementation of compliance with international and regional treaties and conventions, international and regional covenants, and international and regional charters relating to objects of the Commission. However, we witness the silence from the Commission regarding the Omar al-Bashir issue debacle. Why was this left to the South African Litigation Centre?
No, that is certainly very valid criticism, and as a Commission we try to improve as much as we can. As our first strategic objective, we have that exactly, and that is to improve our international human rights obligations. Our approach on the Human Rights Commission was that this is a formal matter that is before the courts, and we would like to leave it before the courts. But our view, particularly in terms of what is happening now, you will see in our report that we are concerned about South Africa's international human rights obligations. We even mention it as dubious, because we are concerned with the 14 years the Minister has addressed us. We are concerned with the case of Mr. Bradley McCallum in the St. Albans case in Port Elizabeth, who went to the Human Rights Committee, and the Department of Correctional Services did not even respond to letters by the Human Rights Committee. And then obviously the al-Bashir matter, because the al-Bashir matter is an indication, again, if we go out and sign international treaties like we did with the Rome Statute, the question is, what is the value of our signature? Can we be trusted? Do we have integrity? Now we have arguments before al-Bashir where the African states came together and wrote to the ICC to say, but listen, we want to have a discussion on whether it's worthwhile to carry on with the statute because we feel you have strayed from your mandate. In a broader international obligation sense, you do not step out of a treaty that you've put your signature to. You must honor your commitments. So yes, you may certainly say that the Human Rights Commission can do more, and we certainly can do much, much more. But we are trying, Mr. Matez.
Let's get the Minister's view on that. Minister, let's get your view on that, especially if I remember correctly, during President Nelson Mandela's time, he actually made it very clear that our foreign policy should be based on a human rights culture.
Yes, look, I think the comment from Dr. Titus about South Africa's record on human rights being dubious was a bit unfortunate. I notice it wasn't in the overall submission of the Human Rights Commission, it was just in his speaking notes, so I'm not sure if it's reflective of the Human Rights Commission as a whole. But the al-Bashir matter is a complex matter. And it is before the Supreme Court of Appeal. There are issues around President al-Bashir was attending an international African heads of state summit. Would he have been able to have attended the UN General Assembly in New York? Yes, we feel he would have been able to. So there's complexities over the al-Bashir matter. The McCallum matter, one needs to concede inadequate communication between the Department of Correctional Services and Geneva over that complaint. It was a complaint relating to a prisoner in St. Albans Prison, Port Elizabeth. But, that matter has been through the courts in South Africa, and there was a civil claim launched by Mr. McCallum and others, reduced eventually to 2 people, where the court found that the 2 people who were making the claims were not telling the truth and threw the case out. That case is now being appealed. But it's not as simple as saying, oh, well, we just rejected something we didn't like. With the al-Bashir matter, government was concerned that the law must be respected, hence we have appealed. With the McCallum matter, it is following legal processes domestically in South Africa.
Avani, you can come in here probably. How do you see the situation around a human rights, our foreign policy. I know there was a Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs who accompanied the Minister. Our foreign policy must be based on a human rights culture, as Dr. Mandela said earlier in his presidency.
I think that's absolutely right. I think early on in 1994 we committed to various international agreements, which we took very seriously, and I hope the state still takes seriously. And the Human Rights Committee urged the South African government to continue with that early record, like you've mentioned now. I think that part of it, or part of the importance of this, is that in our constitution we recognize international law as being justiciable. So our case law, the way in which we interpret the Bill of Rights and legislation is informed by these treaties and information that's given to us by committees like this, which really underscores the importance of our compliance with these obligations.
Dr. Titus.
I think the point is, Mr. Mateza, that we have strayed from Mr. Mandela's foreign policy, as said that human rights is the cornerstone of it. Mr. Zuma's foreign policy is streets away from what Mr. Mandela intended. And we are not looking good internationally. We have reports also from institutions like Human Rights Watch that really question South Africa's international commitment, and this is why we must hold government accountable. This is why the international community must hold government accountable, and we really would like to see what the outcome of this will be. But fact of the matter is, we are way beyond where Mr. Mandela intended our foreign policy to be.
I want to go to something else because we are not necessarily discussing foreign policy here. The issue of self-determination came up in all the reports that I read, especially the report of the government, the report of the Human Rights Commission. But South Africa is still faced with serious self-determination concerns from a section of the Afrikaner community and the Khoi and the San. One is aware that the South African Human Rights Commission did hold hearings in as far as the Khoi and the San are concerned. What progress is made in this area, Dr. Titus?
Well, at the moment, as far as the hearings are concerned, Mr. Mateza, we have had 3 days of hearings in Johannesburg. We had 2 in Cape Town. We are now going into Uppington and Kimberley. There are still people on the West Coast and in the Eastern Cape that really ask for this. More concrete to self-determination. Self-determination is something we need to be very clear about. We need to really understand what it means. When you speak to the Afrikaner people, we had a case like that at the Human Rights Commission, where they argued they want land, where they argued that the land of the Afrikaner has been taken away from them, and in terms of cultural or self-determination, in terms of the Constitution, that is against the Constitution. We found against them because we found that that was not the case. Because when it comes to self-determination, it has to, as the Minister said earlier on, there are other rights where you need to balance every particular human right. When it comes to the Khoi and the San people, it's more also a question of land, yes, but people are looking also at cultural self-determination. Acknowledge my culture, acknowledge my language, acknowledge that I am part of this history, that Khoi and San people have been here in this country for thousands of years, that colonization affected them really in a serious way, and those are the kinds of presentations that they are making. But we will come up with our report probably around August, September, after we have heard everybody. But self-determination is not a flag, in my view, that you can just wave and say self-determination.
Let me hear the view of the Deputy Minister. Deputy Minister, on the issue of self-determination.
Self-determination is not recognized in the Constitution. What's recognized is, and it's just reading from Section 31, Cultural, Religious and Linguistic Communities, that persons belonging to such communities may not be denied the right with other members of their community to enjoy the culture, practice their religion and use their language, and to form associations. So that's effectively the right, not one of self-determination which relates to self-government. We had the apartheid government trying to foist that onto the country with its apartheid policy. That was all about so-called self-determination.
When we come back from the break, we will give Avani an opportunity to respond on the issue of self-determination. But if you want to join us, you can call us on 714-5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights and Recourse. Stay with us.
Color is part of who we are. It's a gift. It's striking, remarkable, powerful, and it should never, ever divide us. Take on racism and unite South Africa. Find out what you can do during Anti-Racism Week from 14 to 21 March at ansa.org.za. ANSA is an alliance of organizations supported by the Nelson Mandela and Ahmed Kathrada Foundations.
SABC News. We report, contextualize and present news and current affairs honestly, fairly and fully. We consider it a duty to provide consistent, relevant, useful and top quality information and analysis. Our mission is to provide credible, accurate and interesting news programming, bringing news into everyone's homes in everyone's languages. Thank you, South Africa, for relying on SABC News for quality news output and for making us your #1 source of information. SABC News, Africa's news leader.
Launching this plan, we call on all sex workers to recognize the enormous power that they have in their hands in terms of helping our nation in making AIDS a thing of the past. This is your plan. This is a plan you must use. You have been involved in crafting this plan. So use this plan to help our nation to fight the scourge of HIV/AIDS. We cannot reclaim the morality of society by excluding the most vulnerable amongst us. Whatever views individuals might have about sex work, whatever beliefs that we might have about sex works, whatever the statutes that are on our law books might say about the legality of sex work, we cannot deny the humanity and the inalienable rights of people who engage in sex work. Sex work is essentially work as well. Sex work is a trade. It is work that is also recognized by our Constitution. Like anyone else, sex workers have dreams. They have customs, they have beliefs, they have a faith, they are human. They are just like all of us. As one of them was saying during the poetry, they also have blood flowing through their bodies, just like you and me.
Well, that's a statement made by the Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa, at a speech he made on Friday night. Minister Jeffery, is that a change in policy? Is the groundbreaking change in policy? Because he made reference to whatever our statutes say about sex work.
The event that the Deputy President spoke at was launching government's plans to assist sex workers who are either HIV positive or who are negative, but to plans to prevent people from contracting HIV. And it's basically recognizing that sex work exists. It's illegal in terms of what's on the statute's books, but that hasn't stopped it from happening. It's called the world's oldest profession. There is a debate that we need to have as South Africa, that we are having, as to what should happen to sex work. Should it be decriminalized? Should it be partially decriminalized? Because the reality, as the Deputy President was saying, is it's there. And that's what that was the emphasis that he was making.
Avani, you can look for us from a human rights point of view regarding sex workers.
So I think there's three quite important things that come out of the Deputy President's statement. The one is the recognition that everybody has inalienable rights, regardless of whether or not the work is technically legal in terms of the statute books, and regardless of whether or not you or I or a different person might think of the morality of it or otherwise. The second part is the recognition of the vulnerability of people who work in the sex work industry, the lack of protections that they often have, sometimes the lack of formal protections, but also sometimes the realities that they experience. And then I think the third, as you've mentioned now, is this tendence towards law reform, looking into new policies and recognizing the realities and coming to terms with the ways in which we deal with that and remedy some of the difficulties that people are experiencing.
Dr. Titus, as the Human Rights Commission has had discussion with people like SWEAT, all the organizations that are fighting for sex workers, and also probably I'll expect the Minister to respond as to whether should we expect some legislation around this issue, or does our Constitution give us the right to say we have no right to discriminate against sex workers?
I think that's the point, that we should not discriminate. It is a question of equality, of dignity, of respect, which is the thread that runs through our Constitution. And I don't think we need to force everything in legislation. We really have so much to do when it comes to policy, when it comes to implementation, when it comes to changing the minds of men, when it comes to all sorts of societal preoccupations around this that needs to be addressed. And we don't really need laws specifically. The laws can certainly help, but I think we need to come back to the issue of these are South Africans, that is, they are entitled to equality and to be treated with dignity and respect.
Deputy Minister, we commend the work that's been done by the Department of Justice, and as far as the LGBTI communities are concerned. But this is a first step. Should we expect this is a first step to recognizing sex workers? Should we expect some legislation going forward on this matter?
There is a review of sex work legislation. As I'd said, it's currently criminalized, both the sex worker and the client. But it is happening. There are enormous problems being caused, one of which was the one that the South African National AIDS Council was trying to address this past Friday, of the spread of HIV through sexual intercourse. So it's definitely something we have to reform. The South African Law Reform Commission, which is a statutory body, was asked to investigate the matter. They have completed their report, which we are wanting to release very soon, which will then enable, I think, South Africa to debate the matter further. It's something that obviously the country is going to be polarized about, because you'd have people who come at it from a moral perspective, you will have other people who will come at it from a reality perspective. But we do have to try and find some common ground, because where I disagree with Dr. Titus is we do need to reform the laws. The laws are not working effectively. We need to look at what needs to be changed.
The other thing
is something that's more is being looked at by the Gender Commission rather than the Human Rights Commission, which is another of our Chapter 9 institutions.
The other thing for me, Avani, was the fact that there's still a great number of cases against violence against women and children. We've seen the stories from the Tokai forest, we've seen a story from Khayelitsha, we've seen all sorts of stories. We picked up other stories this weekend of a family that was murdered in Randfontein over the weekend. All of these things feature prominently in the reports that I went through that were submitted to the UN Human Rights Committee. But what it does not say, what are we doing about these things?
And this was one of the issues that the Legal Resources Centre in their submission together with Iranti.org and Gender Dynamics picked up about what it is that practically we want to see changing. So law reform is of course important, and that is certainly an important first step in it. But what we would also look for are stronger statements from the government and government officials where we see violence against women or members of the LGBTI groups. We also would like to see better training of the officials who are dealing with these issues. So for example, policemen, police officers and prosecutors around sensitivity when coming to terms with this, in addition to just the policy reform, and then monitoring of how this is being implemented.
I don't know whether you want to add there, Dr. Titus, before we go to a break.
No, I fully agree with what is being said. Of course, what we experience in South Africa that is really of concern is the corrective rape that takes place. And we've had meetings, a number of meetings with the LGBTI community and assisting them with our officers and meeting opportunities and so on. But the issue that really stands out is the fact that some young men or some older men think that they have the responsibility to correct somebody's sexual orientation with such violent effects. And that is where we really, as Avani said, the training for sensitivity as far as police are concerned, when those people are coming to the charge office, and whatever center they call it nowadays, that there should be that kind of sensitivity to those cases, and it's not there.
Well, when we come back, I'll get a final word on this issue of the LGBTIs from the Deputy Minister. If you'd like to join us, you can call us on 011 714 5497 or 5498, or tweet us at Rights and Recourse, or email your thoughts to rightsandrecourse@sabc.co.za. Stay with us.
Color is part of who we are. It's a gift. It's striking, remarkable, powerful, and it should never, ever divide us. Take on racism and unite South Africa. Find out what you can do during Anti-Racism Week from 14 to 21 March at ANSA.org.za. ANSA is an alliance of organizations supported by the Nelson Mandela and Ahmed Kathrada Foundations.
Get all the latest news from the SABC's online news services on our website. Breaking news and in-depth coverage of everything from business, sports to politics and lifestyle. Catch the top news clips and watch live streaming of major news events on the SABC News YouTube channel whenever. Stay connected on the SABC News Facebook page and have your say on news that matters to you. And for the latest headlines and live updates from our reporters, follow us on Twitter. SABC Digital News, anytime, anywhere.
Welcome back to Rights and Recourse as we discuss the human rights reports that are presented to the UN Human Rights Committee by the South African government and NGOs and the Human Rights Commission. Deputy Minister, I want to come back to the good work that is done by the department, and I said earlier we commend the department. We've seen the department had another session with the LGBTI communities recently, about 2 weeks ago or a week ago, and can you bring us up to date with that work that the department is doing with the LGBTI communities?
Thanks for that question. Look, as a result of the so-called corrective rapes and violence against lesbian, gay, bisexual, intersex people, transsex people, the then Minister of Justice, Jeff Radebe, had a national task team established, which is a coalition or cooperation between government and civil society. It's co-chaired currently by the Director General of the Department of Justice, Nkululeko Sindane, and Steve Letsike from civil society. It's basically, developed a national strategy on LGBTI rights. It set up a rapid response team to monitor criminal cases against LGBTI people. And I think it's quite an effective manner of cooperation between government and civil society. My concern is that civil society don't necessarily make use of that opportunity. They've got an opportunity to engage with government. I'm not sure if they're using it enough. And so that's something I would continuously urge the civil society groups to do. As far as the regional LGBTI seminar, that was hosted by the South African Human Rights Commission at the request of the South African government to have a dialogue of representatives or people from the rest of the continent of Africa on violence and discrimination against LGBTI people. And that was held the week before this past week, and I think generally was regarded as very successful.
Let me go to something else, Dr. Titus. The South African labour legislation prohibits child labour. But correct me if I'm wrong, the Human Rights Commission or the Labour Department did some work in investigating this on our farms, especially in the Western Cape.
Yes, we did work on the farms. It may be that the Department of Labour did it as well, because it is certainly something that needs a lot of attention. We did a general report on safety on farms, and we haven't recently where I was involved, but before the Commission certainly have expressed itself very strongly about child labour.
Avani, what is the LRC's role in seeing to it that people do exercise the rights that are in the Constitution?
So I think the LRC tries, and as do many civil society organizations, try to operate at several different levels. So litigation for law firms is of course an obvious one, where cases are brought to us and we try to take that up on behalf of persons who have been affected by it. But I think there are other roles in which we play as well. One of them being advocacy and trying to educate people about the rights, so that they're aware of violations and can bring that to relevant persons' attention where that comes up. And then the second is around law reform and trying to lobby government at both the domestic and the international levels to try and change and to bring laws more or better in line with the obligations that we've committed to, either in the Constitution or in terms of the treaties.
Deputy Minister, this problem we're faced with, especially in the Western Cape, of child labour, is an issue that is part of the cluster on justice, especially the Department of Police and the Correctional Services. I know it is largely an issue of the Labour Department. What role should civil society play and what role should government play?
Well, forcing or even allowing a child under the age of 15 to work is illegal in terms of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. So if a child of 14 is working, that's illegal. A criminal offence has been committed, and the persons responsible for employing the child should be prosecuted. So it would really be for civil society to report those kinds of incidents to the police, to the Department of Labour.
The other thing, Dr. Titus, is in as far as this aspect is concerned, that is the right to humane treatment of persons deprived of liberty. How has government responded to the serious concerns raised in the report from the Human Rights Commission regarding human rights abuses at our correctional services? You've mentioned one of them. You raised the issue of Mr. McCallum in St. Albans in Port Elizabeth and the Lindela repatriation station. What is happening there?
See, what we have at the Commission, Mr. Mateza, is the opportunity to meet with stakeholders countrywide, which we call advisory committees. We call it a Section 11 committee, and we invite people from the police, from correctional services, from the Department of Justice to discuss the issues around torture, prevention of torture, and how we should also align ourselves with international requirements. For example, we've signed and ratified the Convention Against the Prevention of Torture, as well as the optional protocol to that convention. And to that extent, we are in discussions with the Deputy Minister and his staff around what they call NPMs, National Preventative Mechanisms, which in terms of this protocol entitles you as an NPM to enter the police cells, to enter correctional facilities, to enter facilities where people are kept in solitary confinement, to go and establish what happens when that prison door closes and what happens when people complain about issues of mistreatment, of torture, etc. So we get very interesting responses from our committee members, some committee members that can tell you that there's torture taking place in our country right now, and some indicate that it's even more serious than in previous times. We will be presenting a report to Parliament in April around the issues of human rights and policing, around prevention of torture, and the whole status of this NPM. So that is certainly a concern that needs to be addressed, because we cannot afford that our criminal justice system is being subjected by perpetrators of torture behind the prison doors.
Deputy Minister, if you want to respond to what Dr. Titus was saying, also you can include in there juveniles in our correctional facilities, how they are treated in accordance with the Children's Act.
Okay. It's a Child Justice Act, but maybe let me start there. The whole point of the Child Justice Act is was to create a different dispensation for children in trouble with the law. So the emphasis is more on diverting cases, sending the children onto corrective programs to teach them what they've done is wrong and give them the skills to be better citizens, rather than putting them through the criminal justice system. The result of the Child Justice Act is a huge reduction in the number of children in prison. So it was nearly 4,000 in the year 2000, and its current, or in 2014, it was down to 402. So we are trying to keep children out of prison. As far as overcrowding generally, yes, it is a problem. We do have the Judicial Inspectorate, where a judge is appointed after consultation, appointed by the President after consultation with the Chief Justice, to conduct visits of prisons. Members of the Constitutional Court in particular, or judges from the Constitutional Court, are also visiting prisons and providing reports on problems that are going on there. And when matters are reported, there are strong attempts by the Department of Correctional Services to address the problem. So recently there were a lot of negative reports about conditions at Polesmore. The Department of Correctional Services has tried hard to address the problems that were raised. But unfortunately, the bottom line is we have too large a prison population. We are also trying to reduce that in terms of enabling people to be out on parole more, if they're tagged and things like that, reducing the number of awaiting trial prisoners. And so the prison population has been reduced substantially as well, but overcrowding is still a problem.
Well, if you'd like to join our discussion today, you can call us on 011-714-5497 or 5498 or tweet us at Rights and Recourse. When you come back, we'll touch on racism, because we are running a promo on racism that is actually led by the Nelson Mandela Foundation and the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. When we come back, we'll talk racism.
Color is part of who we are. It's a gift. It's striking, remarkable, powerful, and it should never, ever divide us. Take on racism and unite South Africa. Find out what you can do during Anti-Racism Week from 14 to 21 March at answer.org.za. Answer is an alliance of organizations supported by the Nelson Mandela and Ahmed Kathrada Foundations.
The big news is Newsroom.
We also stream live on YouTube.
Whether you're at home, at the office, or at the gym, wherever you are, Newsroom is right there with you. Bringing you all the latest news, updates, sports, weather, and everything in between. Get all the latest news you need on the go via live streaming on our YouTube channel. That's Newsroom, weekdays at 9 a.m. only on the SABC News Channel.
Welcome back. Racism in South Africa is sometimes seen as a cornerstone of human rights abuse. And in South Africa in recent years, we have seen a great deal of racism displayed either on social media or in any other place where you meet people of different cultures. But in the last few months, we have been seized with racist remarks on social media that led to a great deal of concern. We've even seen a debate in Parliament last week around this issue. Should we just talk about it, or should we do something about it?
So I think we probably need to do something about it, but the difficulty is what? It is such a widespread, complex problem, and that is I think, affects people in different ways. So the way in which racism affects or may infringe my dignity might be entirely different to someone else's, whose personal experiences are different, and the vulnerability that they experience may be different as a result of it. But I think it's useful that we're starting to have these discussions at the high levels of government, and now we want to see plans in place for how it is that this can be done. And civil society has a role in it, but I think also the Human Rights Commission will play a very important part.
The Human Rights Commission's stance is known for it. We have released a series of reports around this issue. They have also been asked to look at some of these issues. But let me go to Cape Town to the Deputy Minister. From the Deputy Minister, many people believe that the Equality Court is clogged with issues of racism. How do we deal with these issues? I know you've been talking about legislation to fight racism. I thought there is legislation to fight racism.
To some extent. We have the equality clause in the Constitution, which is that everybody is equal and you can't be discriminated against on the basis of a whole lot of criteria, one of which is race. If you are, then you can take the matter to an equality court. And equality courts are there at all levels of our courts now, magistrates, regional courts, high courts. You take your complaint there, your case against the person who discriminated against you. So if it's racism, who was racist towards you, you could take it there. And you can specifically take hate speech there. What will then come out of that matter, if the court rules in your favor, is some kind of an award from the person who harmed you. So it's not a criminal court. You're not going to get a criminal sentence. You're not going to be sent to prison. But you will, if you were responsible for racism, get punished. Our concern is that not enough people are using the equality courts, and so we really would urge people, if they have a problem, go down to the nearest magistrate's court and ask about the equality court there. And whether you can't raise it there. So that's the one element. We are also looking at introducing legislation on hate crimes, and would include some provisions on hate speech as a hate crime. Obviously, one does not want to limit freedom of expression, and the Constitution of our country is quite explicit that the harm, the hate speech needs to incite harm. It can't just be hurtful. But that's something that we will be introducing in the very near future. Lastly, I just want to talk about the National Action Plan against racism, racial intolerance, or racial discrimination rather, xenophobia and related intolerance, that we are in the process as South Africa in trying to come up with. There is a draft National Action Plan that was launched the week before last. It is out for public comment. We are wanting as much public participation as possible, because this National Action Plan is not just for government, it's for government, civil society, all sectors of South African society. So let's participate in that process and come up with a practical plan that will work. Because it's not surprising, given our country's history, which was a long history, centuries of racial discrimination, that we have huge racial problems, and that's also borne out by the racial inequality in South Africa.
Dr. Titus is an organization or a statutory body that works amongst communities on behalf of government. We seem to be shouting past each other in this issue of racism. And what do the communities say?
No, we certainly do. I mean, if you just listen to parliamentary debates the other day, I mean, Parliament is really something you cannot take serious. It's becoming a national joke. But that brings out to the challenge of interacting with communities. Communities that are saying, if that is happening there, what do you expect of me here? But this is also for me an indication, Mr. Mateza, where we need to understand the law and the legislation, but really to move beyond it. Here we now need to move to the area where people can start understanding each other, listening to each other, understanding its different histories, understanding the sensitivities. And there are people, particularly in the diversity business, that really bring different people together around the table, submitting them to processes, to programs of learning to listen. even with us at the Commission, we try not to go immediately into a win-lose situation, to try and find that win-win and really to put perpetrators and victims around the table and try and find that middle. And then you find that the principal of the school will say, but I never realized what I was saying was so insensitive. I am now open to a clause in my code of conduct in terms of that. You know, we spoke about the issue of self-determination earlier, and I would just like for the Minister's information refer him to 235 in the Constitution, which really has the heading self-determination, because that also becomes an issue where people don't understand each other, where people are saying, but you want to claim something for yourself that you don't belong and you're not entitled to. Section 35 says the right of South African people as a whole to self-determination as manifested in this Constitution does not preclude within the framework of this right recognition to this right of self-determination of any community sharing a common cultural and language heritage within a territorial entity in the Republic or in any other way determined by national legislation. A lot of words, but it indicates that we have that right. So we need to find a way within this framework to discuss with each other and to be open and sensitive to each other's histories and backgrounds.
Let's give a final word on this to the Minister, Deputy Minister. Deputy Minister, final word?
Well, if we tackle the issue of racism, I mean, yes, obviously on all these issues, including self-determination, we need to debate. It is interesting that, let's take the Afrikaans community, certain sections claim that they want a right to self-determination, but it doesn't seem to necessarily be the view of the majority. So we've also got to look at what are people saying holistically, what is a group of people, a community of people saying as a whole. On the issue of racism, look, it's something that government is focused on. This month is Human Rights Month. Human Rights Day on the 21st of March is a national day against racism. And it's something that all of us have to look at. I think the issues can be solved by a greater understanding of our fellow South Africans, an understanding of our history collectively and individually. And I think a lot of the problems are caused by a sense of cultural superiority, that if you're white, if you're English speaking, or Afrikaans speaking even, then you are more superior to other people in South Africa. But I think the key thing is that South Africa led the way to the rest of the world in showing that the way to deal with problems, the way to deal with disputes is to talk about them, to talk to each other. And we've come a long way.
Deputy Minister, let's leave it there. Thank you very much. Avani Singh and Dr Danny Titus, Deputy Minister John Jeffery, thank you very much for your time. As we said earlier, we cannot touch on all the things that were presented to the UN Human Rights Committee. The Constitution affords us as a pathway to healing and integration. It offers our country what the law in my lifetime has offered me. It offers us a framework within which to repair our country, to restore, redress and reconcile. It is up to us to claim the opportunities it offers. For the Constitution exists not only for high dreams and good times, it is there also for moments of dismay and sobriety. That is not a bad achievement for our first 2 decades. This has been Rights and Recourse. This program is repeated at 5 on Monday morning. For all of us in the studio, thank you to our guests and goodbye.